race, or because people look certain ways, they should dress in these ways. And if they don't, they're doing something wrong. That's when what used to just be biological facts comes along and starts being actual races and genders and socially constructed ideas. Because the fact is there are biological differences between us. It's just how do we think about them that is where race and gender really tie in. And now, to be clear, that race and gender are socially constructed is something that is arguable, and I think everybody agrees that to some degree there are certain sorts of biological differences and ways of categorizing this that you can like come up with. But one thing that's like scientifically, objectively clear is like the way that race is nothing like purely straightforwardly scientific in the way that like the difference between a human and a squirrel is. Like the race differences between people is a much more complicated, messy thing than like a black and white sort of example. No. So yeah, this is the idea. Is the idea behind race and gender is just that like there are biological differences. It's just what do we think about them and what are they is very much tied in with our social creations and the fact that we treat people as members of different groups.
Yeah, I was gonna say like, because like the race, I mean, I don't know exactly the origin of race, but like I remember reading about it one time. It started out as like propaganda, like in this news article or in like a news story about, you know, the different categorizations of the humans, like in the earlier American times. But I think it was also based off like a lot of the other propaganda coming from other countries, like about classism and like separation of different races.
And here's just like, here's a general fact about, and one of the reasons, the way you can think about like where an idea like race comes along, it's a combination of like our intrinsic biological impulses combined with like mistaken views of science. So basically every human being, we are programmed from our days back when we were living in caves to prefer people who look like us to some degree. Not entirely, but there's some underlying biological thing, and the reason why is because the people who look like you are probably members of your small group living in a cave who are probably unlikely to kill you. Well, if somebody looks very much unlike you, the chances that they'll kill you is higher. Not high, but higher. And so that's one thing, is people, like, we have these issues, and there's other things that are just like, we are programmed as children, we become used to seeing some things, and things that are different we're like programmed to be afraid of. And so all of this trickles down, and we also have this habit of assuming that things that look alike are alike, and things that look different are different. And that's built in also to our biology, which is designed to, you know, protect us. So like, why is it that we assume that things that look like bears are bears? Well, because if we know one bear and we know it might eat us, then the next time you come along and you see something like a bear, it's probably a bear, which means it probably could eat you, which means you should avoid it. And so there's this sense in which we just like overgeneralize things that look alike, because back in like the olden days when we were living in caves, it was useful for keeping us alive. The issue is we don't live in caves anymore, and the things that used to keep us safe from bears are now making us racist. That's one way of thinking about it. So yeah, this is what I mean by race. So the fact that people have different skin tones, that is a biological fact. But the fact that your skin tone makes you a member of a race, that's a socially constructed thing. And the idea of blackness or whiteness, or like even going back to on those charts about throwing everyone, like the US Census puts everybody of any of like 47 different countries' descent into a catch-all pot called Asian, that is a social construct as well. So that's what we're talking about with social constructs. And so this actually goes back to a few before. What makes social constructs continue? What is it that puts them in place? How do they proceed? Think back to our regulation unit. There were some ways of regulating things. One was law, one was market pressure, one was architecture, and then there was a fourth one. Started with an N. Norms. Norms are the main way in which like social constructs come about and keep going. So why is it that people of a certain race continue to be a member of that race? Well, it's because people treat those people in a certain way. Or what is it to be a man? Well, to be a man is to be treated like a man and be expected that you will follow man norms. And if you're a woman, it's expected that you will follow the woman norms. And what we see are cases in which race and gender are very much these things that come about because people assume if you look a certain way, you have to follow certain sorts of norms.
Professor, I think this is too far-fetched what I'm about to word.
Yeah.
But I've actually listened to a lecture that has little to no to do with what we're talking about, but it talks about the neurology, and it tells that human brain has actually evolved in a way that, let's say, it rewards laziness in order to preserve energy, and for this reason, stereotypes actually for the purpose of classification actually encourages this laziness. But why it does this, why does brain encourages laziness, is because you don't know when you can find, where you will find energy and when you will find it, and for this reason, brain does this, because when it is in active mode, it consumes more than a quarter of the whole body energy. For this reason, there is a stereotypical classification.
Yeah, this is a really great point. And so remember I was saying, like, biologically it makes sense to overgeneralize? Well, another thing that biologically makes sense is to use as little energy possible to make decisions. So, if you, like, you are all in school, you have all had to write papers. Thinking is hard and takes effort. Like, the worst way to have to go about writing a paper is if you haven't eaten in 3 days. Like, it's going to be the worst paper you've ever done. So, what's a good way of making sure that you save your energy up, especially if back in the day most of your energy had to be saved to, you know, attack a woolly mammoth? Well, one way of doing it is just to not be too concerned about whether you get things precisely correct, and rather you just make stereotypes. Like, so, you met one person who looks a certain way, and they were really mean to you. So what do now? You just assume that everyone who looks like that is going to be mean to you because you don't want to spend the energy to figure it all out yourself. And so once, like, we evolved to have stereotypes. And the issue is, though, the sorts of conditions in which they were helpful are no longer the case. Like, it used to be the case that getting food for your next meal was a genuine question. And for some people today it is, but on the whole, the odds of you dying on your way to get food are much lower than they used to be. Like, go back 100,000 years, and the chances of you dying when you went to go get your next meal were not small. Like, you had to go kill something. These days, it's you go to the store and you pick it up. And so the odds of something bad happening, much lower. So you don't need as much energy. Like, you can go to the store now if you're not functioning at 100%. Like, if you have a cold, you can still go to the store. If you've got the flu, you can still go to the store. You can't kill a bear with your hands if you have the flu. So in this way, if people more often needed to save more and more and more energy, people start stereotyping. And so instead of thinking like, oh, this is another human being, and the fact that they look a certain way is a complex number of biological factors having to do with their entire gene pool, people just go, oh, they look a certain way, so they must be this way. And so that's what we really see. And so you start to see the norms both of like how you should act if you are of a certain group, and also other people having views about how a person will act based on how they look. So that's all we're talking about here that's what we're talking about with race. Now, with that in mind, let's jump over to the tech side of things. So everyone on board just what we're talking about with race. That was a whirlwind tour of something which we should, in theory, spend all of an entire semester on. But one thing, just like one interesting thing I've noticed is that New York City residents have an understanding of race that is so much more sophisticated than like the average American, just because of the simple fact that like you go to like a like rural Midwestern town where like 99.9% of people are white, and the idea that race is somehow an essential fact of a human being, you can kind of understand it because all the people they see look alike and there's a sense of like community and everything. But you come to New York and you immediately are like, I've got 17 friends who are mixed race. My family comes from a part of the world that like doesn't fall neatly into any racial category. Everyone I talk to is the same, and we all hate tourists just as much. And you start to realize like, oh yeah, race is definitely like the simple, clear-cut thing. Everyone's got it. So that's another reason that we don't have to spend too much time. Is because like if I would much rather like here's the fact. If I come into a John Jay classroom and then I were to go, they wouldn't let me, but imagine I went and taught this in Harvard, I'd have a much easier time getting you all on board here because you all are just much smarter than the average Harvard student when it comes to race. Like, that's just a fact of the matter. You are all geniuses and really understanding of this because you live it every day. And that's a wonderful thing about New York and the best way of getting around some of this stuff. But, all right, so now let's talk about tech. Remember those tech numbers. And our two questions are, one, what caused these differences in racial numbers? Why are there so few blacks working at Google? And the other question is, what are the potential downsides of this? What are the potential consequences? Or should we just say, like, this is a fact of the matter, let's stop here?
See, like, that comment I made earlier about, like, Google only being for Asian people, like, I was, like, I know I said, like, a joke, but, like, I was serious, too, because, like, at the same time, because then he made the point about the NBA being the large demographic of African Americans, right, or black people. So, like, then you would think, okay, so if I wanted to really have a profession or career, I had to look at the majority of the people that they're hiring, and as opposed to, like, the largest playing field or pool applicants.
Yeah.
Like, being or in the largest pool applicants, like, or being the pool of the largest applicants.
Here's another thing about human beings. We like to be comfortable. We don't like feeling on edge. How many of you have gone to a party where you didn't know anyone? How much fun was that party for the first 10 minutes? It depends on how friendly the people are. But generally, like, you want to go to a party where you know most of the people and you can just relax. And you can have a good time, and you don't have to worry about being on edge. Or, like, how many of you have gone to, like, one of those, like, end of the semester, or, like, meet and greets of new students, and everyone just, like, stands around and is a little bit awkward, and you don't really know what you're doing? You're like, oh, yeah, I know that, and, yeah, everyone's... And the reason why is because there's a sense in which when you're comfortable, you just are more natural, you can be yourself. It takes less mental energy because you're not questioning everything you're doing. If you're around your family or your friends, you don't have to ask, can I say this? Is this the right thing to say? You just kind of relax and be yourself. Well, one way of majorly reducing how much stress you feel is if you feel you should be somewhere and that you're part of something and that you belong somewhere. This is why, like, you know, think about, like, children getting bullied in a playground. The worst types of bullying aren't necessarily the physical ones. It's the sort of, you don't belong here, you have no friends, go away sort of vibes. And so if you go to a workplace in which you feel comfortable, where you feel that people are going to respect your work, in which you feel actually like you belong there, you will be happier, you'll be more likely to stay there, and you'll be much more likely to do better work. If you go to a workplace in which everyone spends the whole time being like, oh, you're the token so-and-so person, isn't that funny? Or, you don't look like everyone else here. Or, oh, you wouldn't understand, you're not like us. You're not going to enjoy the workplace, you're going to be off kilter, you're not going to want to apply to a place like that in the first place. And so one of the things that we see with those demographic numbers, and one of the causes is, there are social stereotypes of who should work where. And because of this, what ends up happening is if you're somebody who wants to work at a company, but you don't fit the stereotype, there's much more discomfort in working for that company. So one reason, and this both works as like the causes and the consequences. On the one hand, because we had stereotypes that said, if you're of this race, you shouldn't work here, then you have fewer people of that race working there, which then leads to it getting more of an opinion of, oh, people of this race shouldn't work here. And then you have less people working there and fewer people wanting to go in. So that's one reason why you see this, is you have this idea of people of this race shouldn't be here, therefore they don't apply, therefore there are fewer of them, therefore the few who do make it there don't want to stay there because they're treated differently. So that is one major drive here of the consequences behind this. What are some others? Here's another, so going on this sort of thing, is in a lot of these cases, these are things that aren't explicitly, like people aren't necessarily thinking, just because we like to be around people who have backgrounds like us and look like us, it makes us more comfortable. You don't have to have people actively stereotyping or being prejudicial against you to make it the case that you feel a little bit less comfortable in the workplace. But it's also the case that a lot of workplaces are actively prejudicial towards certain groups of people. Or very often, like, there's a sad fact about human beings is that every single one of us is to some degree implicitly racist. What do I mean by implicitly racist? Anyone know? It's not like you would say like this group of people is worse than this group, but what sorts of things? Yeah, so it's microaggressions, and it's also sorts of things where like you don't even realize the way that you're treating someone is slightly different based on the way they look.
And also like this type of feeling where you thought like this person might be unfriendly, but
Yeah.
turns out they're actually friendly
Yeah.
in terms of race-wise.
Yeah, it's the sort of thing in which you don't realize that you are using this the way this person looks and
Yeah.
judging them accordingly, and you might not consciously ever realize you're doing it, but there are certain sorts of ways. So there's a famous study they did a few years back in which what they did is they presented subjects with pictures of people that flashed before them in an instant. And these photos were either of, I don't remember if they were cartoons or actual pictures, but it was either a black person or a white person, and in their hand was either a gun or a cell phone. And the photo flashed for less than a second, and they just asked you as the subject to say, was that person holding a gun or was that person holding a cell phone? And what they found is every subject on average, no matter what the race of the actual subject was, well, what do you think the outcome of the experiment was? Anyone have a guess? So the outcome was that people very often, if the person was white, like the person depicted was white, not the person taking the test, the person shown in the photo, if the person was white, people were more likely to misidentify a gun as a cell phone, and if the person shown in the photo was black, they were more likely to misidentify the cell phone as a gun. And this would, again, it didn't matter what race the person taking the test was, it didn't matter their gender, and this is just the ways in which things in which we don't realize that we're like this. And the only way to work against it is like it takes active work to be like, oh, I know I have some weird biases that were programmed into me because of these weird corner-cutting things that were programmed into me by the fact that I'm lazy. Because again, we are programmed to be lazy, that's why we like to sit around. We are partially carnivores, and carnivores like to sleep around to save our energy. So because of this, if we don't want to be racist and we have these sorts of tendencies, we need to like actively work against them. And what we see is the fact that we all have these sorts of tendencies can lead to discriminatory hiring practices and things like that.
About the carnivores thing.
Uh-huh.
That would make sense, but like some people out there say that we're herbivores. And for me that makes even more sense that we would want to lay around because like meat has a lot of like calories and like grass and leaves don't. And so like
So generally the way to think about it is, I mean, granted, most animals like to lay around because getting food in, but the difference is mostly herbivores are actually generally more, like they spend more of their time moving, and the reason why is because each individual piece of food has a lot less calories, but the food is much easier to get, so they just kind of meander around and eat. But meat eaters, like every single chance of successfully killing something is very small. Like we think of lions as like the great kings of the wild, but they only like successfully kill things on less than 50% of their hunts. And that's a huge use of energy. So the idea is you lay around, you lay around, you lay around, you save all that energy for one moment, and then you spring and try to get food. So that's the idea. Human beings, we fall in the middle where we kind of eat, I mean, like evolutionarily, we eat both meat and we eat plant products.
Okay, maybe I was looking for an excuse to be lazy.
No, and the fact is, like, regardless, like, it's biologically useful to be lazy because you want to save your energy for when you really need it. And the issue is that nowadays, if you're lazy, then you aren't going to be offsetting these implicit sorts of racial things. And the thing is, we don't necessarily even realize the way these things are getting into our system or in our society, or the ways that they are just assumed. And one nice thing is that we are becoming more and more aware of these things, but it does take effort and energy to respond to this. And one of the reasons why we see differential hiring practices is for the simple fact that we are, as a society, most people still have some types of racial biases, even if we know that we shouldn't, and consciously we are not racist. What are some other ones? What are some other potential issues for these sorts of things? This kind of ties back to what we talked about last time. What did we talk about last class for those of you who are here?
It talks about the fairness of the level foundation.
Yeah, so here's another thing.
The
This
fairness.
is our dear friend money, and we said that we don't want a society in which everyone makes the same amount, but having some sort of equality with money also ties in with equality of opportunity. And if you are well off, you have more opportunities in certain ways than somebody who's less well off economically, because you have more free time, because you can pay for other people to do things for you. You have more opportunities for jobs because you can afford tutors or education or et cetera. So another thing that ties in with this, leading back to last time, is that race in the United States is very closely tied with socioeconomic class. And that's just like a fact of the matter about the unfortunate history of the United States of America and the tie-ins with racism and norms. And what we see is a society in which people of different races have different average incomes and different life expectancies because of facts about, historical facts about how much money your parents had and what your ancestors were like and how much money gets passed down to you. So another reason we see these differences is to get a job at Google, what do you need? What do you need to do to get a job at Google?
Interview and 7 interview.
You need experience, you need knowledge, you need to be good, and these are sorts of things where if you have more free time, you can get better at these sorts of things. If you are worrying and working 9 to 5, and then on top of that are a full-time student, the odds that you're going to be able to get yourself to the point of full success are lower than if you're somebody who's starting with a lot of money and therefore can devote your free time to becoming the best possible student ever and appearing for Google. So that's another sort of way. So what we see is, with the causes of why is the race and tech the way it is, part of it is we've got these norms, these racial norms and racial expectations. Another one is we've got the socio-economic tie-ins. What are some other ones? What are some other, or we could jump to the other side. What are some of the consequences? If we want to say that it's a problem that Google has these gender numbers, what are some of the negative issues that come about from the fact that Google is majority white and Asian male employees?
I mean, obviously there's like racial issues, but I think it's just about trying to get the best person for the best job. Like,
Yeah.
you're not.
I agree with that.
Yeah,
You know?
and here's the question, and here's the consequences in question, is at the end of the day, we want Google wants themselves to have the best employees possible. They want to hire the people who are best at the job and most likely to succeed. So, one thing you might ask is, are the practices which led us to this point are they the result of getting the best possible employees? And it looks like if we actually look at what Google's doing, even if that's their goal, what we see is some of these socioeconomic issues and some of these racial biases are preventing them from getting the best employees. So for instance, this was a study that was conducted a few years ago where they literally just sent out resumes to people. I'm going to make you all guess what the independent variable of this thing was. So they sent out a whole bunch of resumes, and of these resumes that got sent out, 10% or 1 in 10 got a callback. Over here, it took 15 resumes on average, or 1 in 15 to get a callback. What was can anyone guess what the difference between the resumes they were sending out were?
Male and female.
Pardon?
Male and female.
Not male and female. Can you guess?
It's basically like the duration, like it took them longer than it was to be expected.
So that's for this group. So what was it that caused it to take longer to get a response? Anyone know? I'll give you a clue. Everything on the resume was exactly the same, except for one thing.
The name?
The name.
The name.
They found that people with generically American white names were 10% likely to get a callback. But people with like stereotypically African American names were 1 in 15 to get a callback. That right there, like if we want to say that Google is looking for the best possible candidates, the fact that this person and this person, the only difference is a name, like, your name does not make you better or worse at a job. Like, if I was David or Bob or George, like, I would do the job just the same. In the same way, like, this right here is a sign that people are not looking at the best candidates in the sense of who does the best work. They cannot help but be affected by things like what this person's name is, and their stereotypes about people with those names. So that is one thing in which we can look at the Google numbers and be like, yeah, they are trying very hard, and we understand that they want just the best possible people. But if the fact is that their racial biases are affecting who's getting hired in these sorts of ways, then we can't look at it and say the things that led us to this point were really them actually getting the best candidates, even if that's what they were trying to do.
Yeah, that's also what I was gonna say, like, because it's like, you're trying to get the best person for the best job. I mean, the best job, you're trying to get the best person for the job, but there's like two ways of going about it. Like, you could do it by, like, you know, figure out the best person through their actual aptitude, or you could assume that, because if you think about it, like, if you apply this same, like, theory with a whole bunch of African Americans, a whole bunch of Latinos, and you just only look for them to see how many